What's something a teacher did that made the whole class lose respect for them? Story 1. A girl in 3 of my classes was allowed by the administration to have her cell phone during classes because her father was dying. I was aware of the situation since it had been happening for a week, and she often had little breakdowns. One day, during the first period, her phone vibrated while the teacher was talking. He disregarded the fact that she was allowed to have her phone and demanded she hand it over. He even said, "I'll read it, and if it's not your mother, then I'm keeping it for the rest of the class because it rang while I was talking." The girl flipped out, started crying as soon as she saw her phone screen, and said, "No, I'm leaving." This started a standoff between the teacher and her. He ended up blocking the doorway while still demanding her phone. His logic was that if he didn't know it was her mom texting her, then he couldn't let her leave. At this point, she was inconsolable, and everyone in the class was screaming at him to let her go. "F your complex, dude, let her go!" He kept screaming back, "I'm in charge here!" The class made so much noise that security came in to see what was going on. Security told the girl to go to the office. Her dad died that day. She wasn't in school for a month. The teacher took a leave of absence, and we had a substitute for the rest of the year. From then on, students were not allowed special circumstances for cell phones, and teachers were no longer allowed to block students from leaving. Story 2. The class was doing a project on criminal justice and held a mock trial. My friend got assigned to play the role of an assault victim. In real life, she had been a victim of an assault that was very similar to that of the character. She felt it would be too emotionally draining and tried to get out of the part. The teacher wanted an explanation, but my friend kept saying it was very personal. This went back and forth a few times over the next 2 days, and it just wasn't clicking in the teacher's head. Finally, he lost his patience and yelled out, "You're holding up this whole project for everyone. Why the hell is it so difficult for you?" With the whole class paying attention, she admitted she had been assaulted the same way this character had and went to cry. They changed the topic of the project after that, but the class never really looked at the teacher the same way again. Story 3. It was 40-degree weather, Celsius, in outback Australia, and she wouldn't turn on the air conditioning in class even though it worked. Her reason? When she was young, she didn't have air conditioning, and she survived. All the students hated her. Mine was the reverse. In the middle of winter, up in the Blue Mountains, she wouldn't turn on the heater in the mornings because she grew up without heated classrooms, and it's like, yeah, but you guys were allowed to wear giant coats, were you not? Story 4. At university, my professor did not tell us the time of our examination, despite numerous emails from 20-odd students as well as the head professor of the course. This exam could have been any time from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and I lived 90 minutes from campus and relied on crap public transportation to get to uni. It got to 9 p.m. the day before the exam, and no one knew when it would be. If we missed it, we would all fail the whole module. So I took the train to the city where my uni is, booked a cheap, crappy hotel for the night, just to make sure I was there on time. We all took the exam at 12 p.m. after getting an email an hour before it was being held, so I wouldn't have made it in time if I'd stayed home. Worst part was that no one cared. Not the professor, not the course lead, or the head of our school. They all just left 30 students in the lurch, allowing them to potentially fail the exam and therefore the module. Story 5. In my second semester of my first year of law school, everyone in my class, 80+ people, had to take a research class. This class was taught by 4 different law librarians but followed the same syllabus. It was also worth 1 credit. These librarians ran the class as if it was 3 credits. We had to read, conduct legal research, and write 2 memos throughout the semester, all while having 5 other classes within 2 to 4 credit ranges. Plus, one specific class was notoriously difficult. Halfway through the semester, my class got pissed at the workload to credit ratio, and someone started a petition to reduce the number of assignments and/or change the grading for the class from a letter grade to pass-fail. Almost the entire class signed it, though there were a few holdouts. The student who started the petition delivered it to the librarians. The librarians removed 1 or 2 assignments but otherwise disregarded the petition. Those who signed awkwardly suffered through the rest of the semester. Story 6. A teacher forced us to make a donation to a charity. When I didn't bring anything in, I got a demerit and had to argue that not everyone has the ability to give something away. She then told me off for backchatting in front of the class. Everyone was like, WTF? Story 7. My work sent me on a 3-day advanced Adobe Illustrator course last April in London. Just before the exam, the tutor said, "Oh, by the way, there may be a few questions on this exam we haven't talked about. Just do your best." What the actual F? My work had just paid €1,000 for this. His response was that he couldn't be expected to teach everything. There were about 6 students in the class, and we were all pretty annoyed. Story 8. She didn't believe in field trips because she said that kids would have too much fun and that learning isn't supposed to be fun. However, the entire grade would take the trip, so she was required to take us. She would make us all sit in the common area of the zoo, museum, etc., and hold classroom lessons there. It was so upsetting to hear about all the cool things the other kids got to see while we had class. The fact that I still remember things I learned on field trips compared to the countless times I was in classrooms says a lot. Sad to see some teachers think like yours. Story 9. He would act like he was enlightened and say stuff like, "Video games rot your brain. All your free time should be spent on education, as that is all that matters." But then, during the lessons, he would go completely off topic and start talking about random stuff. Apparently, he was making a board game that could compete with chess because he was just that brilliant. Story 10. A teacher screamed at the class because he assumed that an intermittent beeping sound that occurred throughout the lecture was somebody receiving texts. It was the projector he was using, alerting him to the fact that it was overheating. Dummy. That's almost as good as the time a substitute tried to confiscate a student's phone when it beeped. It was a diabetes monitor attached to the student's body. Story 11. I had a college professor who was teaching a history course to a bunch of education majors in their junior year. She would ask us questions all the time about things she hadn't yet lectured on, and then pull the, "Really? No one knows the answer to this? Well, I guess we'll just wait for someone to answer." We were all education majors, we knew that trick. We waited her out every single time. She always broke first. For people asking what the trick was, this was a poorly executed attempt at using the democratic method. It's better to have students arrive at an answer themselves than it is to tell them. However, you have to first create an environment of trust and respect so that the students are comfortable enough to risk a wrong answer, and you have to be willing to provide a little bit of scaffolding. Should no one know? This professor did neither of those things. Story 12. Our French teacher held a 5-minute detention for the entire class because we waited outside the classroom for her to let us in. You know, like polite kids do. She claimed we were wasting her time and sent detention notes home to all parents. Better still, on results day, she said, "Wow, I didn't expect you to get an A." Story 13. We were about 10 to 11 years old. It was the last period of the day, and the music teacher was subbing for our science class. He was sitting on the computer, and we were all getting on with work. Towards the end of the period, our homeroom teacher came into the classroom and exclaimed, "It's the end of the day. Why are you all not packed up?" The music teacher replied, "I told them, and they refused to." Excuse you." He hadn't said a thing to us, so we all protested. Even so, our homeroom teacher told us off for being disobedient, as the music teacher slithered out of the room, and we had to stay 10 minutes late as punishment. Story 14. The head teacher of my high school tried to expel me for having an epileptic seizure in front of him. He said I was a danger and distraction to other pupils and was disrupting his school. I ended up being kept out of school for 2 months while my parents fought my case. In that time, almost all the other teaching staff, who were furious with this decision, kept me supplied with work and even provided one-to-one tutoring when needed. This was in a rural area where the next nearest school was 40 miles away, so I had no other school choice. My brother was finding his balance of medication while in high school and would have a seizure every so often in class. That by itself is embarrassing. Why the hell would somebody make it even more difficult for you? I'm sorry, friend. People suck. Story 15. A teacher spent weeks teaching us the shin lever method of learning about natural science instead of teaching from the book. On test day, he gave us the test that came with the teacher's version of the book. So we never even covered the info on the test. We all scored very poorly, but learned to ignore him in class and study the book on our own. Story 16. My German teacher would make you retake spelling tests until you got 100%. Once you did, you could sit and do whatever you liked until the whole class got 100%. This caused a lot of pressure on everyone, as he used to belittle the students who didn't pass the first or second time. If you were the only one left, he would stand over you and watch you struggle. On test day, I decided to bunk off, but I got caught. I burst into tears and explained how horrible this teacher was and that I wasn't going back to his class. I was moved into a higher set German class with an amazing teacher, and my German improved. Story 17. This was my second year in school. My teacher, unable to manage 20 rowdy kids, was pretty enraged by the end of the class. She had this thing about counting every piece of equipment after class, and she began counting the Newton meters. If you don't know what those are, they're literally a metal spring with plastic around it that measures how much an item weighs. This teacher counted 19 when there were definitely 20. So she held us back from lunch, brought in the faculty head, and gave us a bollocking about not stealing from the school. If we were rowdy before, we were raging now. She requested the least well-behaved kids open their bags. Of course, these kids protested, but the teacher threatened detention if they didn't comply. After rummaging through prepubescent kids' bags and finding nothing, she finally went back to her desk, where she found the Newton meter sitting behind her "World's Best Teacher" mug. The look on her face was priceless. Story 18. This math teacher had a reputation for being a hard case and gave a lot of spontaneous tests. He played up one specific revision test right before midterms or finals, as being a really big deal where the result would reflect if you had any potential in the subject. After we did the test, he went on holiday and took the test with him to correct them. He forgot to bring them back, and nobody ever got their results. Another bonus, the same teacher had a double period before a double period of gym. Sometimes 10 minutes before the bell, he'd just say, "We haven't covered enough, so instead of gym, you'll have another double math period." Story 19. I had one of those teachers who would just put a bunch of activities on the board and browse something on their laptop. All lesson. Worst part, it was a math teacher. The only thing she'd do was maybe tell us to shut up once or twice. Apart from one time, possibly after someone had a word with her about how little she did, she suddenly snapped and sent the entire class outside until we were ready to work. We all just laughed, browsed our phones, and didn't take her seriously. Those who cared about algebra went back inside. Eventually, we compiled a document of her behavior to show the dean. But before we could, someone accidentally shared it with her. For the last term she was with us, she actually improved. Story 20. I was in the school finals of a general knowledge quiz. The question I was asked was, what is the collective noun for a group of whales? I answered confidently, a pod. The illiterate teacher had a school written on her answer card and refused to listen when I assured her it was a pod. Her ignorance cost me the grand title, and I was practically in tears in front of the whole school at the injustice. Everyone then labeled me as a bad loser. I'll never forget it. Still seethe about it from time to time. It happened in 1985. Story 21. In GCSE English, she taught us the wrong novel for almost the entire term. We'd read this book over and over, answered essays, and studied every significant narrative meaning. Apparently, none of the faculty caught on until about 6 weeks before our exams, when they realized all our work was on a book, not even on the syllabus. All our time was effectively wasted. To rectify it, we lost all our PE lessons, had to stay late after school 3 days a week, and spent 3 out of 5 lunch breaks cramming the actual book with another teacher. Safe to say, our class wasn't happy at all, and most parents complained, as it would affect our ability to pass the exams. Story 22. The teacher told us we couldn't keep a bottle of water in our lockers because it could be vodka or something. I told her she could smell it and check. She said, "That's not my job." Then added that I could just use the drinking fountain. I asked her if she would use the drinking fountain instead of her mug, or the tap in the teacher's lounge. She wouldn't answer. Story 23. I had to pee. I asked to go to the restroom, and the substitute, who was a full-time teacher for another class, said, You don't have to pee, just sit down. After more pleading and begging, I just peed my pants. I was late and totally mortified. What made it worse was that the teacher told my parents, he should have spoken up earlier. Accidents happen. I still think I should have peed on her desk. Story 22. My teacher lost my finals, then made me retake them while making passive-aggressive comments about me trying to cheat. 2 weeks later, she found my original final on her desk under a pile of papers. Story 25. In second grade, our class was walking in a single file line outside for recess. It had rained and was muddy and slick. The class bully, a heavy-set mean girl, was walking ahead of me. She slipped in the mud and fell on her butt. She jumped up and immediately pointed her finger at me. I got detention for a few days and had to spend that recess with my head down on a desk in the teacher's office. I swore I didn't do it, and no one believed me. Wow, that was like 1989 or 1990. And yeah, it still pisses me off. Story 26. In my last year of junior school, I arrived to find everyone gossiping about my two friends and me being in trouble for some reason. We'd been accused of bullying this kid. We had to apologize to him and got called to the headmaster, who blew his top. Our form teacher told us that she hoped we'd get bullied when we went to secondary school. Most of this would have been fine, but when we went to apologize, I didn't even recognize the kid, let alone know him or bully him. He turned out to be a good guy, so at least I made a friend for the final 3 months of school. Even to this day, I can't guess how the story originated. Story 27. We had this multicultural fair in my elementary school, and the faculty wanted a Japanese kid to do origami at the Japanese station. I was the only kid who knew origami. I was, and still am, Filipino. So they had me pretend to be Japanese and do paper cranes and frogs and stuff. It was just ridiculous. I was talking to the guidance counselor about how it was ridiculous to me that a single missed assignment could drop my grade by 20 to 30 points, regardless of its importance. The counselor said, just because something is wrong doesn't mean you should try to change it. Why the F would a guidance counselor give that type of advice to a freshman in high school? Story 29. A couple of weeks into my freshman year, I transferred into a more advanced science class. On my first day in the new class, there was a quiz. I asked the teacher if I was exempt from the quiz since it was my first day. She said no. I did well, especially for not having been taught any of the material. Here's what bugged me. The final question on the test was, what country is the ticket from? Of course, I got it wrong. The sentence didn't even make sense. She wouldn't give me any clarification during the test. Once it was graded, I asked what in the world she meant. Turns out, ticket was her pet bird. First off, capitalize the name of your pet. Also, that's not an appropriate test question. I told the teacher I had no idea it was her bird. She said, well, now that you know I'm talking about my bird, I'll give you another chance. What country is my bird from? I was stunned that she thought I was now equipped to answer this question. I wasn't in class to hear her reveal where her bird was from. I guessed something like Chile. She said, wrong, it's Africa. Africa? That's not a country. I was so mad. She also arrogantly proclaimed every so often for the first few weeks, if anyone spots me making an error, they'll get an instant A for the year. I can't count how many times I busted her in class, but she never stuck to her word. Last of all, some random girls I didn't even know told the teacher I taught her bird swear words. I got in trouble for that. I never said a word, much less swear words, to her bird.